so much.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Rugby Nation on Rugby.com.au after a weekend. It feels good to say it too, where we finally had some Aussie rugby to watch and to talk about. A couple of games here in Australia. We say welcome to Rugby.com.au's Beth Newman. Beth, a little bit of rust maybe, but two really entertaining games of rugby.
Yeah, just a good weekend, having some footy back, as you mentioned before, Nick. And the key thing, I think, is at the 70-minute mark, both games were in the balance. And that's all you can ask for is, an exciting finish. And we got that.
Exactly right. And this week's guest on Rugby Nation would have been sitting and watching intently over the weekend with the Western Force having that week one bye. Jono Lance, welcome to you. What did you make of week one?
Yeah, it was definitely great to have rugby back on the television in Australia, and we actually met up as a team on Friday afternoon here, Perth time, to watch the game. And yeah, as I said, it was great to have rugby back on the telly, but it was just, I think, a really exciting time for a different type of group here in Perth. You got the older guys like myself who've come back and really enjoying being back in WA, but a lot of younger guys who are very excited about going up against guys who they have competed against through school, through age group stuff, and getting pretty confident from the hard work they've been putting here in WA.
And looking at that first weekend, I mean, there's so much talk about the law changes and that sort of thing. As someone who's got a bit of a boot, Jono, what did you make of the 50-22s and the goal line dropouts and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I liked it. I think you need to make changes, and I don't think too many need to be made, but a few of the changes that they have brought in, I think, will make the defence have to cover a lot more field. And for me, growing up in a bit of a rugby league family, I used to love the 40-20 rule, and to be able to have that sort of 50-22 rule, I think we might need to think of another name for the law, but yeah, to have that in the game, to force teams to have a back three and to use that kicking game is something that's definitely exciting. And I think, yeah, you saw on the weekend how much it can change a bit of momentum with, I think Bryce Hegarty had his big one, and Tate McDermott. It almost swings a game if you can get one of them. So yeah, it is exciting.
There was a lot to like about some of those law changes. There's so much to talk to you about, Jono, and we will do exactly that over the next 20 or 30 minutes. And, of course, the Western Force in action for the first time this weekend against the Waratahs Saturday night at the Sydney Cricket Ground. But before we get to all of that, Beth, a couple of the news stories kicking around and the closure of the New South Wales-Victorian border. I mean, for the rebels and their families, it's a mystery, isn't it, what that might all mean?
Yeah, I think that's the talking point that seems to just keep on keeping on, in Super Rugby, the rebels. You have to feel for them. And also the Force, it probably should be mentioned as well, about to go into a hub for a few weeks. But with Melbourne, going into lockdown for the next 6 weeks, anyone who's not in Victoria now is not going to be able to go back, for the next 6 weeks, and vice versa. So, on Monday, when the situation kind of worsened, the rebels were kind of scrambling to get some players and staff to have their families be able to come and be around them in Canberra, because they don't know when they're going to go home, and it is a really tough situation. And as much as everyone's been very quick to point out having perspective and making sure that there's lots of people who are in worse situations, it's a tough time for these guys, not knowing if they're going to be on the road for 8, 10 weeks, and only having 24 hours to prepare for that scenario where, normally if you go on tour, months in advance, as opposed to, literally, a 36-hour sort of window.
Exactly right. And we'll talk to Jono about that in a moment too. But and this question really leads us into Jono Lance as well. But some experience for the Force this week, putting pen to paper, and they just keep on recruiting some really experienced players, and that's going to help down the track.
Yeah, it's actually been so exciting to see some of the names that are signing up for the Force. And most recently, last week, Pet Cowan, one of the foundation Force players, and also, former Wallabies scrum half Nick Frisby coming along. It's these kind of names that people maybe haven't thought about for a little while, but will definitely bring, some excitement. And, I guess, Jono, what have you made of some of the new guys coming in, or new old guys, I guess you could call them?
We're still young. No, it's definitely been exciting. I think everyone who was involved in 2017 and us had such a great year, but it was a great year through adversity, and I think we all sort of moved on into different challenges, but harboured ambitions of playing for the Force again. And to be able to do it and get that opportunity in this competition is really exciting. I know, as you said, Peck being one of the initial members of the Western Force, through talking to him the last few days, and I think seeing his social media posts about how much he's dying to get out and get back involved with the team, I think he's going to be a very important person to have involved. Just through his experience, through his excitement, through playing for the Force. Those kind of guys are really going to keep driving our younger guys and help develop those younger guys, because, yeah, there's some quality here. I've been really excited with what I've seen in training the last few weeks. And as you said, another guy, Nick Frisbee, a few years ago, constantly in the Wallaby setup, and he's gone to Scotland. And I think personally, for me, very similar. I'm sure he's come back a lot better rugby player in terms of learning different ways to play, how he can change and adapt to a game mid-game as well. So, yeah, there's an exciting group of guys who have signed up in recent weeks, and I think that's probably testament to how good the rugby community here is in WA. When you've got a rugby community where you're talking to guys from other teams and you're constantly talking about how much you enjoyed your time in Perth, I'm not surprised that, yeah, these people have signed and wanted to get back involved.
Hey, Jono, just on Nick, he's talked about how, his, I guess it was a little bit inglorious, the exit from the Reds, but he said that, that was a real kick in the pants for him, bit of a wake-up call. And you know him so well. Do you expect that he's going to put his name up again, perhaps, for Wallaby selection? I mean, all bets are off there in terms of that Wallaby squad.
Yeah, for sure. I think his signing is, I think, evident enough that he's got ambitions to get back into Australian rugby and sees himself as a player who can and put that gold jersey on again. I know that we're all excited just because we know what a good guy is around the rugby group. And there's another halfback here, Ian Pryor, who's also extremely I think underrated in Australian rugby. So for him to get that opportunity to work with Nick and learn from each other, because they're both quite similar but a little bit different in how they go about the game, for those two to be able to work with each other and then work with our younger halfbacks here at the club, it's going to be exciting. And I think those two are going to push each other to get the best out of each other, because I think they've both got those ambitions. So, yeah, I'm excited to play outside all our nines at the club. But yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Let's talk about you for a moment, Jono. You're back after a few years in England with Worcester, back at the Western Force. You had a couple of seasons there, 16 and 17. You were going to head to Edinburgh, so just briefly take us through the journey back to Oz.
Yeah, I'm meant to be doing a pre-season in Edinburgh at the moment, so I definitely much prefer jumping headfirst into some games here in WA. But yeah, I signed in Edinburgh and was really excited about that opportunity to go play Champions Cup. I think that's everyone's sort of goal when you go to Europe, is to test yourself in the best European league. And as I said, I was very excited about that. There was unfortunately a rule I didn't know about, which was that I needed to play 75% of games whilst I was based over there. And unfortunately, I was in a position where at Worcester, they chose to play a lot of English guys for their European games, which is well within their rights to do. But yeah, resulted in me dropping below that number. So yeah, it's been an interesting few months. Have always said, though, when I came back to the Gold Coast to be with my family during coronavirus, I wasn't too sure what would happen. I think everything was up in the air at that stage, but I'd spoken to a lot of people about if things went down a certain path, I'd love to play for the Force again, and that was before anything happened. So I did have little thoughts and ambitions to do that, and I've still got goals and stuff that I want to tick off here in Australia. And I think, yeah, as tough as it's been for everyone in the world at the moment, there's been a lot of positives, and this is one of the bigger positives, I think, in my rugby career, to get the opportunity to come back to Perth and play in this setup is something that, yeah, I'm pretty pumped about, and yeah, really ready to get stuck in this weekend.
Is that something that's, I guess, kind of added to the excitement of the force being back in Super Rugby? Like guys like, Kyle Godwin, even I think Greg Holmes was in a similar situation with his visa to you, and having the opportunity to actually play, and, that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been there, with the force, the way that things have been the last couple of years?
Yeah, for guys like Kyle to come back and play at home, I know he's just as excited as we all are, and Big Holmesy, very excited to have him here in the West. I keep saying to him, he'll come for 4 months and find himself in about 10 years still living in Perth, because I think him and his wife will love it over here. So it is a great moment, and one that sort of happened so fast that it is like I'm still pinching myself that I'm over here and back playing and training at Force HQ. So it has happened so fast that I think that excitement can really galvanise this group. I know they've been really working hard the last few years with the global rapid rugby, and there's a lot of people here who've still been pushing extremely hard just because they know how strong the rugby community is in WA. So yeah, I'm pretty pumped and excited. And yeah, when I drove into Force HQ for the first time in 3 years, I had a big smile on my face, and I knew that the right decision had been made, and I was pretty happy with how all the events had gone.
Yeah, John, a lot of people obviously very pleased to see the force back. I heard you tell the Rugby Ruckus podcast last week that it was kind of like an itch to scratch, that you could almost feel that not only the organisation in itself, but also the rugby public, that they've got an axe to grind. There's that chip on the shoulder about what happened a few years back. How does that drive what the force is trying to do? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think the chip on the shoulders definitely can be quite a healthy thing when you're an athlete, when you're a player in competitive sports. You need to have all the motivation you can get, and for me personally, that's definitely there, and I've got some individual goals and ambitions that I'm pretty keen to push hard for in these next 4 months to start that. And I think a lot of the guys here really excited about what's happening, and I think individually there's probably a lot of chips on the shoulder, but I think as a group, 2017 was such a tough year for everyone here in Rugby WA, and it's hard to explain when you come over here from the East Coast. You really see how strong a family the Sea of Blue is, and how passionate they are about the group. So we're extremely excited to represent rugby in WA again, represent the fans, represent the Sea of Blue, and I think for us to go over to the East Coast and get an opportunity early on in this competition to spend a lot of quality time with each other and learn each other and learn what drives why we do it and why we play the game is going to be, I think, a massive positive for us. And yeah, it's definitely there, and everyone's I think here is passionate because they just know how important rugby is in the West, and how important I think Rugby Australia is to have a good brand and good base in Perth and WA.
Talk about that 2017 and the emotions and that sort of thing. What was it like? What do you remember of that kind of last week heading into, I mean, ironically enough, a game against the Waratahs at home that seemed like it would be, your last Super Rugby game. What was that sort of week like?
Yeah, it was definitely tough. I think the whole year was just a roller coaster. I think there were times you'd come in and you'd hear that we're fine, we're not going anywhere, and then the next week you come in and you've read something completely different. The whole year was about getting that balance of trying to win games, or are we trying to score 5-6 tries and show how good the rugby here is in the West. And to go into that last game, we were still extremely positive, I suppose, of still playing Super Rugby the next year in Perth. And but we all sort of, I think, had a bit of a 50-50 in the mind where, okay, if it doesn't work, we better go out swinging. And I think that really showed throughout the year. We really bonded as a group, and made sure that if we were going to go down, it was going to be, as I said before, going down throwing a lot of punches. So that last game, I remember the build-up for it massively, just because it was Hodjo's last game, and he is the Western Force. I saw the highlights put up the other day, and him taking that conversion at the end. He was asking how to put the ball on, and when you watch the footage of it from Fox, you see his dad standing up in the crowd, and you see the crowd still there going nuts. So it was definitely a tough week, but at the time we were all fingers crossed that it was going to go away. I think it obviously it didn't, but I think those experiences throughout that year have put us in a position now where we're ready to throw a few more punches again in the next few months.
Can't wait to see it over the next couple of months. You're right. Hey, John, it probably doesn't feel like you've been away for very long, but have you been sort of blown away by that next generation of player coming through? That happens really quickly, doesn't it? Now you've got those under-20s coming through and everyone's talking about them, possibly slotting into the Wallaby setup.
Yeah, well, I think there's probably a few older guys who still ready to put their hand up and say not just yet, but it is exciting to see. Obviously had 2018 at the Reds, and I think that was a good year for me to work with a lot of those younger guys. And when you learn who they are as people outside of rugby, I think you get a lot more excited about their potential going forward. I know a guy like Tate McDermott who is, I suppose, such a unique player. But yeah, playing with him in that year and learning all the guys personally is what I think excites me the most about looking at that group. And as you said, there's a lot of younger guys coming through who I think is extremely important in Australian rugby, because you need players in all positions to be constantly pushing each other and driving each other to play quality Super Rugby each weekend. And then when you get a group in that gold jersey who know that if they're not performing, they've got another 3 or 4 guys at other Super Rugby teams who are just as ready to go, that's when Australian rugby is at its healthiest. So it is exciting seeing these younger guys, and I think this time has given Australian rugby an opportunity to take a step back and I think really give itself some goals and ambitions in the long term, but also in that short term. So I think that's probably the most exciting thing about this Super Rugby AU is that it's almost like a week to week, the derby matches you speak about, but you have those added stresses of going up against people who are your mates and who you grew up playing against. And the games on the weekend, I think, showed that last weekend.
I guess the other element of that, right, is that everyone's kind of pushing for a Wallaby spot as well. Is that something that, kind of burns inside of you a little bit to try and get back into that realm?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm a part of a select group of people who once were almost Wallabies to be on the bench and not quite get on. Warmed up in that game, getting ready to go on, but unfortunately France scored right at the end to cost me that. And for me, as I said, I've got some individual goals that I'm excited to be back here in Perth as a team doing, and one of those is to pull on that gold jersey. And I think with how the squad is here, and I suppose how excited I feel at the moment, I'm ready to definitely put my best foot forward and push for that. And I think there's a lot of guys in this squad here in WA who I think some people on the East Coast might not have heard of, and I'm pretty confident that there'll be a few of the guys here involved in the Wallaby setup come the end of the year, and they'll be definitely coming some household names.
Who's really impressed you so far?
I think for me, there's a few guys. I mentioned Ian Pryor before, who's a very underrated player, but there's some young back rowers at the club, some young front rowers. I know that Andrew Reddy is another hooker here who's been involved in that setup. But for me, as a back, I do a lot of work with the young backs. Jack McGregor is a pretty impressive player. I know there's Palmer Fowl, who has had a rough run of injuries, but he's a pretty intimidating person to look at as a physical being. And I know we're all excited for him to put a few games together. And some young centres, a young guy, Grayson, he's from Kalgoorlie. There's a lot of young guys who people are definitely going to learn their names. I could go on. Nick Joost, Perth local, who's was involved at the Brumbies and has been to the Reds as well. So, for me, it's exciting. And I think, as I said just before, I reckon in about 2-3 weeks, some of these no names will definitely be in and amongst the talk about what's going to happen at the end of the year.
Do you feel like that's something that you guys have as a bit of an edge, that maybe you are a bit of an unknown quantity and teams might underrate you given, you know, the way that's all kind of unfolded?
Yeah, I think we're quietly confident in ourselves, and as Nick said before, with that chip on the shoulder, if you use it right, it can be very positive. But I think, as well as that, we're excited about getting over to the east and getting in that hub and galvanising as a group in that way, and using the excitement of being able to just represent rugby in WA again. But yeah, as you said, like it's going to be an exciting time going forward, and we almost annoyed that we had to have the bye week 1 because we were so excited to pull on that Force jersey again. And I know that the post Rugby.com did the other day with the boys are back. It has definitely been played a lot by a lot of the guys here, and I don't know if it was the song choice, but yeah, everyone's pretty happy with that post because we just know that it's going to be a great few weeks, and we're definitely gonna put it in and throw some punches.
It is going to be a great few weeks, and it's a real chance to reconnect with fans. And this is something I know you think about a bit, being one of the older players and probably being away, you get a bit of perspective. Have you got a view on how the game can reconnect with Aussie fans and maybe over the next couple of months create a bit of buzz about rugby in Australia? Is it just about winning, Jono, or is it more than that?
I think winning's obviously a massive part of it. Everyone talks about the style of rugby. For me, there's my 2 years in England. I also had 3 years in England as a kid when my dad coached one of the rugby league teams over there, and I remember going to games and there was the band playing. I still remember all the Leeds Rhinos songs from being a 9-year-old that the band would play, and they had the trumpets going, and it was such an atmosphere that for me as a 9, 10, 11-year-old, I couldn't really tell you who was winning and losing. I was concentrating on everything else. So there's definitely the win-loss aspect, but to be in England last 2 years and see the drums and trumpets again was something that it almost just took me back to being a kid and really, really excited me. And I think one thing that the Force have done well in the last 2 years is really drive those other avenues of entertainment you can do at a game. And I know through that Global Rapid Rugby and with Andrew Forrest pushing that, the Force has definitely looked at, I suppose, changing that dynamic and making that the whole experience of going to a game of rugby, as I said, just one big experience. I know that guys in England would take their daughters and their sons, and I always say that the dad might be annoyed if there's not a win, but he's pretty happy if the kids have still had a good day. So I think there's definitely things we can explore in that sense. But I think for us in the West, we're pretty keen to just have as many people in WA watching on the telly these next few weekends, and we're definitely fingers crossed that by the end of the year, or in 4 or 5 weeks, whatever it is, we get the opportunity to come back to Perth and play at our stadium in front of our home fans. And I'm sure by then it might be able to have as many fans as possible, and I reckon you'll probably go close to seeing a pretty packed out stadium here in the West. So yeah, I definitely think there's things we can look at, and as you've said, that's the time. This is the time to do it, and you'd be silly if you weren't thinking about ways we can improve that as well.
And what about, you got a view on a competition structure that might engage fans and create that buzz we're talking about? What does that best look like for you?
I think a lot of people have spoken about that Trans-Tasman setup, and obviously Rugby New Zealand is king. And I think you've seen from how they've played in the last 3 weeks, coming straight back into it, and the quality of rugby being played there is testament to their players, testament to their setups, and I suppose the quality of club rugby there as well. I don't really have an answer because I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I know as a young guy coming through, I got extremely excited by the possibility of travelling to South Africa, and those 2-week trips to South Africa can really build a season. I know In the Reds years, they look back at, I think the Stormers win in 2010 is something that they look at as the stepping stone to that 2011 season. So I know a lot of guys love those South African trips to start of a season, middle of a season to build for your Super Rugby campaign, and I know a lot of fans in Australia are South Africans who want that as well. So for me, I think the Trans-Tasman thing needs to be the driver, but there's a lot of other exciting stuff that are in those other avenues, and I think as long as you're involving those ex-players who have recently retired, they'll definitely get to a good part where I think rugby in Australia will be on the upwards trajectory in the coming years.
And what about as someone who has, taken the decision to head back to Australia and be part of Australian rugby? There's a lot of talk about tweaking the GIO Law. Do you believe there should be a certain amount of players able to be selected back from overseas to play for the Wallabies, or do you believe that the commitment needs to be made to come and play back in Australia if you want to wear Wallaby gold?
Yeah, but maybe tweaking is a way you could put it. I know that I've stayed very close to all my mates in Australia who are playing in England, and we try and catch up every few Sundays for a roast somewhere in the Cotswolds, which was great to catch up. But a lot of those conversations headed down a path of how passionate we were about rugby in Australia and speaking about ideas that we had and thoughts on the game. And I think because you got so many guys based overseas who are still as passionate, if not more passionate, about rugby in Australia, when you're going to work today dealing with a whole bunch of English and South Africans and Kiwis, you want to be talking about Australian rugby. And I know that I probably have looked back and been more passionate than ever about the rugby in Oz, and to have players playing probably their best rugby in their years of 26 to 28 playing in Europe, I think is something that needs to be looked at. And I know there was a lot of talk last year about Will Skelton trying to come back, but I also know as a Worcester fan having to play Saracens how much he was a factor in our game analysis and how intimidated I know a lot of the players were by how dominant he was for Saracens. So I think it needs to be looked at, there needs to be tweaking, but at the same time I also understand that needs to be a driver to keep guys playing in Australia. And for me, for 7 years, 8 years, that was the driver to stay in Australia, was to push for higher honours and the love of the game here. So I think that's probably one of the main reasons why I'm still pinching myself that I'm back here and pulling on a Force jersey and playing in this competition, because when I originally left, I thought that was it. I'd given it a good crack and I'd loved my time here. But to be back here doing it again and feeling better than ever is something that is exciting. And as I said, I've had a pretty big smile on my face the last 3 or 4 weeks here.
That balance that you mentioned, how difficult is that decision for so many guys who have to go overseas and know that they're having to give up that Wallabies dream? Like, from the guys that you've spoken to, how big a thing is that, I guess, to give up for them?
I think it's probably everything. And the fact that you'd catch up with guys and we'd talk about it on a Sunday in Gloucester or in England, still, I think it's testament to that. It's something that weighs on your mind, and as long as you're confident in the fact that you've given it a pretty good crack, I think it can make it a bit easier, but it's never a complete easy one. And I know it was something that I did weigh up for a long time, and I think for me it was just a bit excited about experiencing something different and getting that spark again. Obviously after the year at the Force, things were pretty flat, and I was very much excited about going and experiencing something new and experiencing rugby in Europe. So it's a tough decision, and as long as you're speaking to your family and friends about it, it can make it a lot easier. But I think it is a tough decision because of how important the gold jersey is to everyone who plays rugby in Australia. And you grow up watching all the great Wallabies and the Wallaby teams, and you tell yourself you're going to do that. So I think yeah, as Nick said, that tweaking is probably the word to use, but it's still a massive driver, and you speak to younger guys, and I don't think anything's changed.
Now, before we get to the games this weekend, the biggest concern for your army of fans, Jono, on social media is that, now you're out of lockdown and out of quarantine and playing again, that maybe the quality of the quarantine social media fest might drop off a little bit. Can you guarantee that you'll keep that quality up and keep doing your socials?
Yeah, I think arguably it could possibly even take it to another level. Going to be in the hub for a month, or however long we are there. As you said, similar to the Rebels, it's a bit of the unknown, but yeah, a chance to get away and be in that hub setup. You could really see just an upwards curve of quality, or maybe I'll go for quantity over quality and just really annoy all my followers. So my hair's probably not going to be as good because I'll have to have teammates doing the bleach on it. I think that might have to stick around because I'm feeling young when I look in the mirror. But yeah, I'm excited about these next 4 weeks, as I've spoken before, and yeah, I can let my small but passionate fan base on social media know that there will still be some pretty good content coming out.
Oh, come on, mate. Don't undersell yourself. It's not small. It's huge. It's huge. Beth, let's have a look at a couple of games this weekend. The first on Friday night, the Rebels and the Reds heading to Brookvale, as I understand it, in Sydney.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one, isn't it? It's the sign of the times we're in, that two interstate teams playing at a cult location in North Sydney. It should be a really exciting game. The Rebels really showed that they've got some firepower in their pack last weekend, kind of getting the better of the Brumbies at the scrum, and the Reds did the same thing against the Waratahs as well. So it's going to be really exciting. And then probably the deciding factor will be whether they can unleash their really exciting backline. So hopefully it should end up being a really open, free flowing game.
Who are you leaning towards there, Jono? The Rebels or the Reds?
I'm going to go with the Reds. I think their young group will have learned a lot from the game on the weekend, and probably feel they left a few points out there. And yeah, it's a tough one because I was about to say something about home field, but yeah, they're meeting halfway at Brookie. So yeah, there's a few rugby league tragics in that Reds team, and they'll be pretty excited to be playing at Brookie, I think. So yeah, I'll go with the Reds for that one.
All right, your old team, a couple of stints at the Reds, although you were almost a former Rebel as well for a little bit of time there. And then you guys against the Waratahs on Saturday night. I mean, it is going to be special, probably a little bit emotional too, right? There will be a level of emotion that will carry you guys a certain way into that match. Yeah,
we're pumped to get over there, and I think I'm the only one in the team who's played at the SCG, so it is exciting for us to get over and rip in. And we've watched the Waratahs, and no, they've got some extremely dangerous players. So as I said, there's a lot of younger guys here who are keen to test themselves against that. The player who's been involved in Super Rugby the last few years, and yeah, we're very confident in the work we've put in these last few weeks. And for me, as coming over and being quite fresh to it, and watching training and watching the quality of training they've put out the last month and how hard they've been working, I'm pretty confident in the effort that's been put in by the Force guys in the last few months. So I've said it a few times, but I'm sticking with it. Yeah, we'll be ready to go on Saturday to throw a few punches, and we can't wait.
And on that note, Jono, it is great to see you back in Australian rugby, and particularly back at the Force. Beth, good to see you again. Plenty to go on with again this weekend. Super Rugby's back. The Western Force is back, and we'll be here every week throughout the season with Rugby Nation on Rugby.com.au. We look forward to your company. Jono, thanks very much. Great to catch up, mate.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having me. And as I said before, hopefully a lot of those Sea of Blue and Rugby WA fans are tuning in to watch the game on Saturday. And yeah, there'll be a whole bunch of emotions going for the group here. And I think that's going to lead to a really passionate performance by our guys. Yeah. So thanks for having me. And the Force is very excited about being back.
Good to hear. Good to see you back. All the best. This is Rugby Nation. We'll see you soon.